Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk a little bit about maintenance or service. One of the questions I get asked the most is how much does it cost to service a Maserati, or how much does maintenance cost on the Maserati? There really isn't a quick, simple answer to that. I like to break it down into two parts. The first is which model do you have? For me, I'll be talking about the Gran Turismo since I've owned 3 of them. And the second part to that is, how do you plan on using it? How many miles do you plan on driving the vehicle? Is it going to be every day? Is it going to be just on the weekends, or whatever you plan on using it for? Those are two key factors. First Maserati I bought was a 2009 Gran Turismo Sport. It was black with red interior. I happened to see it on the lot. I wasn't really looking for a Maserati or a Gran Turismo at all. I was looking for a replacement vehicle, and I happened to see it. I went to take a look at it. Once they turned the key and I heard the engine, I was sold. I couldn't leave the dealership without it. So like I said, I wasn't really looking for that particular car, so I didn't do any research on the vehicle at all, which I don't recommend. If you're in the market for a car, no matter what car it is, especially exotics, do your research. Google, get on the forums, hear what the owners have to say, any problems, what's maintenance like, that sort of thing. You definitely want to know, especially if you're, spending 150 grand or whatever you're spending. It doesn't matter. Just do your research. So this particular car, the transmission, now I think 2009 was the last year for this particular transmission. It came with what Maserati called Cambio Corsa, which is a single plate dry clutch automated manual. Now, automated manual is similar. It's similar to a true manual car, I would say, true manual, in the sense that it does have a clutch. The clutch does need to be engaged for you to change gears. The only difference is you cannot physically engage the clutch as you would a normal manual car. It's done electronically by a computer. Now, this technology, I would say, was kind of old. I'm not sure why they used it in this vehicle. I would much rather have had the true manual. This particular transmission was known for destroying clutches. I wouldn't say destroy. Let's say the clutches would wear out after a while. This is the same transmission that Ferrari used on the 360 Modena and the F430, and Lamborghini used it on the Gallardos from 2004 to 2013, I do believe, was the last model year for the Gallardos. Now, the Lamborghinis, you probably know some horror stories with clutches going bad after 3,000 miles or 4,000 miles. And I did hear that as well, but I think those were on the older cars with those transmissions, like the 2003, 2004, 2005, I believe Gallardos had issues with those. As they went along, the transmission got better. I guess the technology evolved a little bit and it got better, especially when they changed over to the 2009 models, Gallardos. Didn't really hear a lot of stories on the Ferraris, but again, it's the same technology, so I assume they probably had some similar issues. So back to the Gran Turismo. So 2009, this had the later style clutch, so it wasn't going to wear out in 3,000 or 4,000 miles, but it was going to wear out eventually, especially depending on how you drive it. You hear stories about driving in traffic is going to wear the clutch down more because you're constantly engaging in taking the clutch out, taking the clutch in, as opposed to on the highway, it's engaged and you're not changing gears as much. So I want to say, let's fast forward. I had the car a total, I think, a year and a half, maybe about 18 months. So about a year into it, I think I had about maybe 4,000 miles on it, 5,000 at the most. And I'm at a red light. The car is engaged. It's in first gear, sitting at a red light. And then all of a sudden, it goes into neutral. And I'm like, what's going on here? I think I went back into first gear and off I went. Everything was fine. And then over the next, I would say, a few weeks, it got more frequent that the car would just shift down into neutral, especially if I was sitting still at a red light or something, or stopped for more than a few minutes. I immediately got on the phone with the dealer and asked him, what's going on with the transmission? Why does it keep kicking me out of gear? Especially if I'm at a red light for longer than a few minutes or stop somewhere in first gear. And he told me the clutch was at the end of its life, or nearing the end of its life, and it was only going to get worse. And eventually, if I didn't do anything, the transmission, I wouldn't be able to put it in gear anymore. So at that point, I'm doing my research now, and of course it's too late. I mean, I own the car. The clutch life is where it is. There's nothing I can do about it. But so I do some research on it, and that style clutch, as I was saying earlier, with especially with the Lamborghinis and the newer Ferraris, the F430, those clutches, that technology did get better. So the horror stories people had with the early Lamborghinis on 3,000-4,000 miles and having to change the clutch wasn't the case on the newer vehicles. So like I said, at this point, I probably had 40,000 miles, maybe a little more. And my guess is this was the original clutch on the car. It had never been changed. So 40,000 miles for these cars on one clutch, that's not bad. And this is where how you plan to use the vehicle comes into play. Now, say you got a new clutch on it, you put the new clutch on the vehicle, and you're doing, for me, I do, depending on the car, anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 miles a year. That's it. This is not a daily driver for me. So, if that's how you're using the vehicle, you'll probably have it for the life of the vehicle before you need to change the clutch. 40,000 miles, you're doing 4,000 miles a year, or something like that. So, and you think about that cost. If you say, hey, I'm going to spread that cost out between, all the years I have the vehicle, if I'm only driving a few thousand miles a year, that's not that bad. So I went ahead and got the clutch done, and I got the bill here, $7,277.19. Maserati recommends service for your Gran Turismo every 10,000 miles, I do believe it is, or 12 months, whichever comes first. So obviously for me, I'm only servicing the vehicle once a year. Here I had the bill from last year for the annual service, and that entailed complete oil and filter change, replace cabin and engine air filters, performed complete brake fluid system flush, power steering fluid flush, and cooling system flush, and finally replaced all vehicle belts. Grand total of just under $2,500. Now that seems like a lot, and it is. But again, think about how you're using the vehicle. Now for me, this bill is once a year, so I can spread this out, save over 12 months. Now say this was my daily driver and I'm, 10,000 miles twice a year, so I gotta service it twice, or, Maybe I'm doing more miles than that. You have to do it 3 times a year. That's when I say, how are you using the vehicle? That's very important. My daily driver is a Honda, so I'm doing anywhere from 15 to 20,000 miles a year, depending. I'm servicing my vehicle every 3 months. So that's 4 times out of the year, as opposed to with this Gran Turismo, just once. So you say, well, that's a lot of money, but again, it's broken down over the entire year, 1 time, as opposed to my Honda is 4 times. So if you look at it like that, it's not that much. It's an exotic. It's going to cost you more for parts and for labor just because it's an exotic, because of the name, whether it be Ferrari, McLaren, Lamborghini, Maserati, whatever. It's an exotic. It's going to cost more than your Honda that you see all the time up and down the road.